Hi, thank you for coming back. Someone pointed out that I actually missed from pages 34 to page 46. So this is a continuation of part 2. Some facts about Rosa Huberman. She was 5 feet, 1 inch tall, and wore her browny gray strands of elastic hair in a bun. To supplement the Huberman income, she did the washing and ironing for 5 of the wealthier households in Mulking. Her cooking was atrocious. She possessed the unique ability to aggravate almost anyone she ever met. But she did love Liesl Meminger. Her way of showing it just happened to be strange. It involved bashing her with a wooden spoon and words at various intervals. When Liesl finally had a bath after 2 weeks of living on Himmel Street, Rosa gave her an enormous injury-inducing hug. Nearly choking her, she said, "Samich du Dregits, it's about time." After a few months, they were no longer Mr. and Mrs. Huberman. With a typical fistful of words, Rosa said, "Now listen, Liesl, from now on you call me Mama." She thought a moment. "What did you call your real mother?" Liesl answered quietly, "Ach, Mama, also Mama." "Well, I'm Mama number 2 then." She looked over at her husband. "And him over there?" She seemed to collect the words in her hand, pat them together, and hurl them across the table. "That sacral, that filthy pig, you call him Papa. Understand?" "Yes," Liesl promptly agreed. Quick answers were appreciated in this household. "Yes, Mama," Mama corrected her. "Samich, call me Mama when you talk to me." At that moment, Hans Huberman had just completed rolling a cigarette, having licked the paper and joined it all up. He looked over at Liesl and winked. She would have no trouble calling him Papa. The woman with the iron fist. Those first few months were definitely the hardest. Every night Liesl would nightmare. Her brother's face, staring at the floor. She would wake up swimming in her bed, screaming and drowning in the flood of sheets. On the other side of the room, the bed that was meant for her brother floated boat-like in the darkness. Slowly, with the arrival of consciousness, it sank seemingly into the floor. This vision didn't help matters, and it would usually be quite a while before the screaming stopped. Possibly the only good to come out of these nightmares was that it brought Hans Huberman, her new papa, into the room to soothe her, to love her. He came in every night and sat with her. The first couple of times he simply stayed, a stranger to kill the aloneness. A few nights after that he whispered, "Shh, I'm here, it's all right." After 3 weeks he held her. Trust was accumulated quickly, due primarily to the brute strength of the man's gentleness, his there-ness. The girl knew from the onset that Hans Huberman would always appear mid-scream, and he would not leave. A definition not found in the dictionary. Not leaving. An act of trust and love, often deciphered by children. Hans Huberman sat sleepy-eyed on the bed, and Liesl would cry into his sleeves and breathe him in. Every morning, just after 2 o'clock, she fell asleep, again to the smell of him. It was a mixture of dead cigarettes, decades of paint, and human skin. At first, she sucked it all in, then breathed it, until she drifted back down. Each morning, he was a few feet away from her, crumpled, almost halved, in the chair. He never used the other bed. Liesl would climb out and cautiously kiss his cheek, and he would wake up and smile. Some days, Papa told her to get back in bed and wait a minute, and he would return with his accordion and play for her. Liesl would sit up and hum, her cold toes clenched with excitement. No one had ever given her music before. She would grin herself stupid, watching the lines drawing themselves down his face and the soft metal of his eyes, until the swearing arrived from the kitchen. "Stop that noise, sacral!" Papa would play a little longer. He would wink at the girl, and clumsily she'd wink back. A few times, purely to incense Mama a little further, he also brought the instrument to the kitchen and played throughout breakfast. Papa's bread and jam would be half eaten on his plate, curled into the shape of bite marks, and the music would look Liesl in the face. I know it sounds strange, but that's how it felt to her. Papa's right hand strolled the tooth-colored keys. His left hit the buttons. She especially loved to see him hit the silver sparkled button, the C major. The accordion's scratched yet shiny black exterior came back and forth as his arms squeezed the dusty bellows, making it suck in the air and throw it back out. In the kitchen on those mornings, Papa made the accordion live. I guess it makes sense when you really think about it. How do you tell if something's alive? You check for breathing. The sound of the accordion was, in fact, also the announcement of safety. Daylight. During the day, it was impossible to dream of her brother. She would miss him and frequently cry in the tiny washroom as quietly as possible, but she was still glad to be awake. On her first night with the Hubermans, she had hidden her last link to him, the Grave Digger's Handbook, under her mattress, and occasionally she would pull it out and hold it. Staring at the letters on the cover and touching the print inside, she had no idea what any of it was saying. The point is, it didn't really matter what that book was about. It was what it meant that was more important. The book's meaning. The last time she saw her brother. The last time she saw her mother. Sometimes she would whisper the word, Mama, and see her mother's face 100 times in a single afternoon. But those were small miseries compared to the terror of her dreams. At those times, in the enormous mileage of sleep, she had never felt so completely alone. As I'm sure you've already noticed, there were no other children in the house. The Hubermans had 2 of their own, but they were older and had moved out. Hans Jr. worked in the center of Munich, and Trudy held a job as a housemaid and childminder. Soon they would both be in the war. One would be making bullets, the other would be shooting them. School, as you might imagine, was a terrific failure. Although it was state-run, there was a heavy Catholic influence, and Liesl was Lutheran. Not the most auspicious start. Then they discovered she couldn't read or write. Humiliatingly, she was cast down with the younger kids, who were only just learning the alphabet. Even though she was thin-boned and pale, she felt gigantic among the midget children, and she often wished she was pale enough to disappear altogether. Even at home, there wasn't much room for guidance. Don't ask him for help, Mama pointed out. That sacral. Papa was staring out the window, as was often his habit. He left school in 4th grade. Without turning around, Papa answered calmly, but with venom. Well, don't ask her either. He dropped some ash outside. She left school in 3rd grade. There was no books in the house, apart from the one she had secreted under her mattress, and the best Liesl could do was speak the alphabet under her breath before she was told in no uncertain terms to keep quiet. All that mumbling. It wasn't until later, when there was a bedwetting incident, mid-nightmare, that an extra reading education began. Unofficially, it was called the midnight class, even though it usually commenced at around 2 in the morning. More of that soon. In mid-February, when she turned 10, Liesl was given a used doll that had a missing leg and yellow hair. It was the best we could do, Papa apologized. What are you talking about? She's lucky to have that much, Mama corrected him. Hans continued his examination of the remaining leg, while Liesl tried on her new uniform. 10 years old meant Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth meant a small brown uniform. Being female, Liesl was enrolled into what was called the BDM. Explanation of the abbreviation. It stood for Bund Deutscher Mädchen, Band of German girls. The first thing they did there was make sure your Heil Hitler was working properly. Then you were taught to march straight, roll bandages, and sew up clothes. You were also taking hiking and other such activities. Wednesday and Saturday were the designated meeting days, from 3 in the afternoon until 5. Each Wednesday and Saturday, Papa would walk Liesel there and pick her up 2 hours later. They never spoke about it much. They just held hands and listened to their feet, and Papa had a cigarette or two. The only anxiety Papa brought her was the fact that he was constantly leaving. Many evenings he would walk into the living room, which doubled as the Huberman's bedroom, pull the accordion from the old cupboard, and squeeze past in the kitchen to the front door. As he walked up Himmel Street, Mama would open the window and cry out, "Don't be home too late." "Not so loud," he would turn and call back. "Sacral, lick my ass. I'll speak as loud as I want." The echo of her swearing followed him up the street. He never looked back, or at least not until he was sure his wife was gone. On those evenings at the end of the street, accordion case in hand, he would turn around just before a Frau Diller's corner shop and see the figure who had replaced his wife in the window. Briefly, his long, ghostly hand would rise before he turned again and walked slowly on. The next time Liesel saw him would be at 2 in the morning, when he dragged her gently from her nightmare. Evenings in the small kitchen were raucous without fail. Rosa Huberman was always talking, and when she was talking, it took the form of schimpfen. She was constantly arguing and complaining. There was no one to argue with, but Mama managed it expertly every chance she had. She could argue with the entire world in that kitchen, and almost every evening she did. Once they had eaten and Papa was gone, Liesel and Rosa would usually remain there, and Rosa would do the ironing. A few times a week, Liesel would come home from school and walk the streets of Molking with her Mama, picking up and delivering washing and ironing from the wealthier parts of town. Knapp Street, Hyde Street, a few others. Mama would deliver the ironing or pick up the washing with a dutiful smile, but as soon as the door was shut and she walked away, she would curse these rich people with all their money and laziness. Too good to wash their own clothes, she would say, despite her dependence on them. Him, she accused Herr Vogel from Heidstrasse, made all his money from his father. He throws it away on women and drink, and washing and ironing, of course. It was like a roll call of scorn. Herr Vogel, Herr and Frau Pfeffelhuber, Helena Schmidt, the Weingartners, they were all guilty of something. Apart from his drunkenness and expensive lechery, Ernst Vogel, according to Rosa, was constantly scratching his louse-ridden hair, licking his fingers, and then handing over the money. "I should wash it before I come home," was her summation. The Pfeffelhubers scrutinized the results. "Not one crease in these shirts, please," Rosa imitated them. "Not one wrinkle in this suit." And then they stand there and inspect it all right in front of me, right under my nose. What a Jinsdell. What trash. The Weingartners were apparently stupid people with a constantly molting Saumensch of a cat. "Do you know how long it takes me to get rid of all that fur? It's everywhere." Helena Schmidt was a rich widow. That old cripple, sitting there just wasting away. She's never had to do a day's work in her whole life. Rosa's greatest disdain, however, was reserved for 8 Grand Strasse, a large house high on a hill and in the upper part of Molking. "This one," she pointed out to Liesel the first time they went there, "is the mayor's house. That crook, his wife sits at home all day, too mean to light a fire. It's always freezing in there. She's crazy." She punctuated the words, "absolutely crazy." At the gate, she motioned to the girl, "You go." Liesel was horrified. A giant brown door with a brass knocker stood atop a small flight of steps. What? Mama shoved her. Don't you want me, Salmich? Move it. Liesl moved it. She walked the path, climbed the steps, hesitated, and knocked. A bathrobe answered the door. Inside it, a woman with startled eyes, hair like fluff, and the posture of defeat, stood in front of her. She saw Mama at the gate and handed the girl a bag of washing. Thank you, Liesl said, but there was no reply, only the door. It closed. You see, said Mama, when she returned to the gate, this is what I have to put up with. These rich bastards, these lazy swine. Holding the washing as they walked away, Liesl looked back. The brass knocker eyed her from the door. When she finished berating the people she worked for, Rosa Huberman would usually move on to her other favorite theme of abuse, her husband. Looking at the bag of washing and the hunched houses, she would talk and talk and talk. If your papa was any good, she informed Liesl every time they walked through Molking, I wouldn't have to do this. She sniffed with derision. A painter. Why marry that arschloch? That's what they told me. My family, that is. Their footsteps crunched along the path, and here I am, walking the streets and slaving in my kitchen because that sacral never has any work. No real work, anyway. Just that pathetic accordion in those dirt holes every night. Yes, Mama. Is that all you've got to say? Mama's eyes were like pale blue cutouts pasted to her face. They'd walk on, with Liesl carrying the sack. At home, it was washed in a boiler next to the stove, hung up by the fireplace in the living room, and then ironed in the kitchen. The kitchen was where the action was. Did you hear that? Mama asked her nearly every night. The iron was in her fist, heated from the stove. Light was dull all through the house, and Liesl, sitting at the kitchen table, would be staring at the gaps of fire in front of her. What? She'd reply. What is it? That was that Hosfeffel. Mama was already out of her seat. That Samich just spat on our door again. It was a tradition for Frau Hotspfeffel, one of their neighbors, to spit on the Huberman's door every time she walked past. The front door was only meters from the gate, and let's just say that Frau Hotspfeffel had the distance and the accuracy. The spitting was due to the fact that she and Rosa Huberman were engaged in some kind of decade-long verbal war. No one knew the origin of this hostility. They'd probably forgotten it themselves. Frau Hotspfeffel was a wiry woman and quite obviously spiteful. She'd never married but had 2 sons, a few years older than the Huberman offspring. Both were in the army, and both will make cameo appearances by the time we're finished here, I assure you. In the spiteful stakes, I should also say that Frau Hotspfeffel was thorough with her spitting, too. She never neglected to spuck on the door of number 33 and say, Schwein, each time she walked past. One thing I've noticed about the Germans, they seem very fond of pigs. A small question and its answer. And who do you think was made to clean the spit off the door each night? Yes, you got it. When a woman with an iron fist tells you to get out there and clean spit off the door, you do it, especially when the iron's hot. It was all just part of the routine, really. Every night, Liesl would step outside, wipe the door, and watch the sky. Usually it was like spillage, cold and heavy, slippery and gray, but once in a while some stars had the nerve to rise and float, if only for a few minutes. On those nights she would stay a little longer and wait. Hello, stars. Waiting for the voice from the kitchen, or till the stars were dragged down again into the waters of the German sky. Okay, we started that on 34 and ended on 45. Thank you for listening.